Junior TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About with me, Alex Phillips, an opportunity for women to share highs, lows, gripes and groans. Keeping me company in the ladies' locker room today is Iman Aiton, activist and organiser of Black Lives Matter protests. Here are the other stories we're covering today. US President Joe Biden is set to give a major speech any time now on the first anniversary of the Capitol Hill riot. He's expected to blame Donald Trump for what he calls carnage. We'll be crossing live to Washington. The Colston Four are cleared of criminal damage over the toppling of a Bristol statue. We'll ask if it's tacit approval of vandalism. Plus, I want to know what you need to talk about. Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's the news headlines with Rosie. Good afternoon. It's just gone 2 o'clock. Let's get you up to date. The government is sticking with plans to raise national insurance, with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak saying ducking difficult decisions would not be responsible. The Commons leader, Jacob Rees-Mogg, wants the move to be scrapped, arguing the increase can't be justified as families struggle with surging food and energy costs. From April, national insurance is set to rise by 1.25% to help the NHS and social care. Well, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the decision was made collectively.
We think it's absolutely right that we do two things. One, clear up the very big backlog of operations and procedures that haven't been able to take place because the NHS has been so remarkably dealing with coronavirus. And two, make sure that we deal with the long-term problem of social care, and we're doing it through a rise in national insurance. That's the decision that we've made. We think we're making an important historic point here.
The Prime Minister has denied suggestions that the NHS doesn't have the staff to cope with pressures brought on by the Omicron variant. His comments come as the number of hospital trusts on the highest level of alert increased to 24. They now fear priority services can't be safely delivered. More than 17,000 people are currently in hospital with coronavirus. That's the most since February of last year. The NHS Confederation CEO, Matthew Taylor, told GB News staff shortages are part of the problem.
The number of people in hospital with COVID has doubled over the last few weeks. And then, of course, staff themselves are, people like us, and they also get this virus. And if they've got it, they can't go into work, partly because they're not well, but also because, of course, they don't want to be spreading the virus. We came into this crisis with an estimated 100,000 vacancies in the NHS. So the problems we've got now are on top of the fact that we don't have the full workforce that we need.
Survivors and the relatives of British tourists who were killed during the Tunisia beach terror attack have agreed a settlement with the travel operator TUI. 38 people, including 30 Britons, were killed at a hotel complex when a gunman stormed the beach.
TUI agreed the undisclosed figure without admission of liability or fault. A female paramedic has died after a crash between an ambulance and a cement truck. South East Coast Ambulance Service says the collision happened near Tonbridge in Kent last night. 3 members of staff were in the vehicle, with another paramedic suffering serious injuries. A gay rights activist involved in a cake row has been told by the European Court of Human Rights his case is inadmissible. Gareth Lee claims he was discriminated against when the Christian owners of a bakery refused to make him a cake with the slogan "Support Gay Marriage" on top. That was in 2014. Well, he's now considering whether to bring a fresh court challenge under domestic law. The director of the Evangelical Alliance, Peter Linus, has welcomed the European Court's ruling.
It comes down to, can you force somebody against their political, religious conscience for any reason? Can you force somebody to print a message they disagree with? And the court said, no, you can't. For anybody, you can't force anybody against their will. And the European Court has now agreed with that. And I think that's ultimately a good decision, actually, for everybody. It's never been about Christians against the LGBT community.
Novak Djokovic's bid to have his visa cancellation overturned will be heard in an Australian court on Monday. The Serbian tennis player is hoping to defend his Grand Slam title, was told by border officials he didn't meet entry rules and would be deported. The country's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says his proof of exemption wasn't valid.
Rules are rules, and there are no special cases. Rules are rules. It's what I said to you yesterday. That's the policy of the government. Entry with a visa requires double vaccination or a medical exemption. I'm advised that such an exemption was not in place, and as a result, he is subject to the same rule as anyone else.
And a commemorative coin has been unveiled by the Royal Mint ahead of Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee. Marking 70 years on the throne, it depicts the Queen on horseback. It was designed by the artist John Bergdale. It's the first collectible 50p to celebrate a royal event. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 2 now. You're up to date here on GB News. Let's go to Alex and the afternoon agenda.
It's a year since scenes from Capitol Hill were beamed across the world in the tumultuous aftermath of the American presidential election. We watched agog as the land of the free became a ludicrous cartoon of a hastily arranged press conference between a sex shop and a crematorium, while a carnival marched through Congress, costing 5 lives. The full-scale psychological breakdown of America was on rude display. Divisions of identity politics creating a farce of self-indulgent insanity. Today, remembrance events will be zealously attended by Democrats, but boycotted by Republicans. Rather than healing wounds of the past, resurrecting the false binary of good versus evil, red versus blue, still being played out like an ongoing Marvel franchise. America, birthplace of social media, has turned its most exportable commodity on itself. Dot-com bros are the curators of democracy and puppeteers of public opinion, while hostile foreign actors yank at the strings to deepen the schism. With Biden set to blame Trump for the insurrection, little will be done to unite the disunited states. Once a paradigm new world, now a laughingstock, crumbling under self-inflicted lunacy. While we wait for Joe Biden's latest intervention, let's get a reminder of the Capitol Hill riot. GB News reporter Paul Hawkins takes a look back at the events of January the 6th, 2021.
Some called it one of America's darkest days. Others saw it as a demonstration of US democracy. One protester shot dead, 138 officers injured as thousands of angry Donald Trump supporters tried to storm the heart of American democracy, the Capitol building. The authorities and the world taken completely by...
Well, we're going to leave that package because Biden has taken to the stage and is behind his lectern.
Throughout history, including dates that instantly remind all who have lived through them where they were and what they were doing when our democracy came under assault. Dates that occupy not only a place on our calendars, but a place in our collective memory. December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2021. On that day, I was not only Vice President-elect, I was also a United States Senator. And I was here at the Capitol that morning at a classified hearing with fellow members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Hours later, the gates of the Capitol were breached. I had left, but my thoughts immediately turned not only to my colleagues, but to my staff, who had been forced to seek refuge in our office, converting filing cabinets into barricades. What the extremists who roamed these halls targeted was not only the lives of elected leaders. What they sought to degrade and destroy was not only a building, hallowed as it is. What they were assaulting were the institutions, the values, the ideals that generations of Americans have marched, picketed, and shed blood to establish and defend. On January 6th, we all saw what our nation would look like if the forces who seek to dismantle our democracy are successful. The lawlessness, the violence, the chaos. What was at stake then and now is the right to have our future decided the way the Constitution prescribes it, by we, the people, all the people. We cannot let our future be decided by those bent on silencing our voices, overturning our votes, and peddling lies and misinformation by some radical faction that may be newly resurgent, but whose roots run old and deep. When I meet with young people, they often ask about the state of our democracy, about January 6th. And what I tell them is January 6th reflects the dual nature of democracy, its fragility and its strength. You see, the strength of democracy is the rule of law. The strength of democracy is the principle that everyone should be treated equally, that elections should be free and fair, that corruption should be given no quarter. The strength of democracy is that it empowers the people. And the fragility of democracy is this, that if we are not vigilant, if we do not defend it, democracy simply will not stand. It will falter and fail. The violent assault that took place here, the very fact of how close we came to an election overturned, that reflects the fragility of democracy. Yet, the resolve I saw in our elected leaders when I returned to the Senate chamber that night, their resolve not to yield, but to certify the election, their loyalty not to party or person, but to the Constitution of the United States, that reflects its strength. And so, of course, does the heroism of the Capitol Police, the DC Metropolitan Police Department, the National Guard, and other law enforcement officers who answered the call that day, including those who later succumbed to wounds, both visible and invisible. Our thoughts are with all of the families who have lost a loved one. You know, I wonder, how will January 6th come to be remembered in the years ahead? Will it be remembered as a moment that accelerated the unraveling of the oldest, greatest democracy in the world? Or a moment when we decided to secure and strengthen our democracy for generations to come? The American spirit is being tested. The answer to whether we will meet that test resides where it always has resided in our country, with you, the people. And the work ahead will not be easy. Here in this very building, a decision will be made about whether we uphold the right to vote and ensure free and fair elections. Let's be clear, we must pass voting rights bills that are now before the Senate. And the American people must also do something more. We cannot sit on the sidelines. We must unite in defense of our democracy in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our prosperity and posterity. That is the preamble of the Constitution that President Biden and I swore an oath to uphold and defend. And that is the enduring promise of the United States of America. My fellow Americans, it is my honor to introduce a public servant with the character and fortitude to meet this moment, a leader whose life's work has been moving our nation toward that more perfect union, President Joe Biden.
Madam Vice President, my fellow Americans, state the obvious. 1 year ago today, in this sacred place, democracy was attacked, simply attacked. The will of the people was under assault. The Constitution, our Constitution, faced the gravest of threats. Outnumbered in the face of a brutal attack, the Capitol Police, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, the National Guard, and other brave law enforcement officials saved the rule of law. Our democracy held. We, the people, endured. We, the people, prevailed. For the first time in our history, a president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power as a violent mob breached the Capitol. But they failed. They failed. And on this day of remembrance, we must make sure that such attack never happens again. I'm speaking to you today from Statuary Hall in the United States Capitol. This is where the House of Representatives met for 50 years in the decades leading up to the Civil War. This is on this floor where young Congressman of Illinois, Abraham Lincoln, sat at desk 191. Above him, above us, over that door leading into the rotunda, is a sculpture depicting Cleo, the muse of history. In her hands, an open book in which she records the events taking place in this chamber below. Cleo stood watch over this hall 1 year ago today, as she has for more than 200 years. She recorded what took place, the real history, the real facts, the real truth, the facts and the truth that Vice President Harris just shared, and that you and I and the whole world saw with our own eyes. The Bible tells us that we shall know the truth, and the truth shall make us free. We shall know the truth. Well, here is the God's truth about January 6, 2021. Close your eyes. Go back to that day. What do you see? Rioters rampaging, waving for the first time inside this Capitol Confederate flag that symbolized the cause to destroy America, to rip us apart. Even during the Civil War, that never, ever happened. But it happened here in 2021. What else do you see? A mob breaking windows, kicking in doors, breaching the Capitol. American flags on poles being used as weapons, as spears. Fire extinguishers being thrown at the heads of police officers. A crowd that professes their love for law enforcement assaulted those police officers, dragged them, sprayed them, stomped on them. Over 140 police officers were injured. We all heard the police officers who were there that day testify to what happened. One officer called it, quote, a medieval battle, and that he was more afraid that day than he was fighting the war in Iraq. They've repeatedly asked since that day, how dare anyone diminish, belittle, or deny the hell they were put through? We saw with our own eyes. Rioters menaced these halls, threatening the life of the Speaker of the House, literally erecting gallows to hang the Vice President of the United States of America. What did we not see? We didn't see a former president who had just rallied the mob to attack, sitting in the private dining room off the Oval Office in the White House, watching it all on television and doing nothing for hours as police were assaulted, lives at risk, the nation's capital under siege. This wasn't a group of tourists. This was an armed insurrection. They weren't looking to uphold the will of the people. They were looking to deny the will of the people. They weren't looking to uphold a free and fair election. They were looking to overturn one. They were looking to save the cause of America. They were looking to subvert the Constitution. This isn't about being bogged down in the past. It's about making sure the past isn't buried. That's the only way forward. That's what great nations do. They don't bury the truth. They face up to it. Sounds like hyperbole, but that's the truth. They face up to it. We are a great nation. My fellow Americans, in life there's truth, and tragically there are lies. Lies conceived and spread for profit and power. We must be absolutely clear about what is true and what is a lie. And here's the truth. The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest, and because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution. He can't accept he lost, even though that's what 93 United States senators, his own attorney general, his own vice president, governors and state officials in every battleground state have all said he lost. That's what 81 million of you did as you voted for a new way forward. He has done what no president in American history, the history of this country, has ever done. He refused to accept the results of an election and the will of the American people. While some courageous men and women in the Republican Party are standing against it, trying to uphold the principle of that party, too many others are transforming that party into something else. They seem no longer to want to be the party of Lincoln, Eisenhower, Reagan, the Bushes. But whatever my other disagreements are with Republicans who support the rule of law and not the rule of a single man, I will always seek to work together with them to find shared solutions where possible. Because if we have a shared belief in democracy, then anything is possible. Anything. And so at this moment, we must decide, what kind of nation are we going to be? Are we going to be a nation that accepts political violence as a norm? Are we going to be a nation where we allow partisan election officials to overturn the legally expressed will of the people? Are we going to be a nation that lives not by the light of the truth, but in the shadow of lies? We cannot allow ourselves to be that kind of nation. The way forward is to recognize the truth and to live by it. The big lie being told by the former president and many Republicans who fear his wrath is that the insurrection in this country actually took place on Election Day, November 3rd, 2020. Think about that. Is that what you thought? Is that what you thought when you voted that day? Taking part in an insurrection? Is that what you thought you were doing? Or did you think you were carrying out your highest duty as a citizen and voting? Former president's supporters are trying to rewrite history. They want you to see Election Day as the day of insurrection. And the riot that took place here on January 6th as a true expression of the will of the people. Can you think of a more twisted way to look at this country, to look at America? I cannot. Here's the truth. The election of 2020 was the greatest demonstration of democracy in the history of this country. More of you voted in that election than have ever voted in all of American history. Over 150 million Americans went to the polls and voted that day. In a pandemic, some at great risk to their lives. They should be applauded, not attacked. Right now, in state after state, new laws are being written, not to protect the vote, but to deny it. Not only to suppress the vote, but to subvert it. Not to strengthen and protect our democracy, but because the former president lost, instead of looking at the election results from 2020 and saying they need new ideas or better ideas to win more votes, the former president and his supporters have decided the only way for them to win is to suppress your vote and subvert our election. It's wrong. It's undemocratic. And frankly, it's un-American. Second big lie being told by the former president and his supporters that the results of the election of 2020 can't be trusted. The truth is that no election in American history has been more closely scrutinized or more carefully counted. Every legal challenge questioning the results in every court in this country that could have been made was made and was rejected. Often rejected by Republican-appointed judges, including judges appointed by the former president himself, from state courts to the United States Supreme Court. Recounts were undertaken in state after state. Georgia, counted its results 3 times, with 1 recount by hand. Phony partisan audits were undertaken long after the election in several states. None changed the results. And in some of them, the irony is the margin of victory actually grew slightly. So let's speak plainly about what happened in 2020. Even before the first ballot was cast, the former president was preemptively sowing doubt about the election results. He built his lie over months. Wasn't based on any facts. He was just looking for an excuse, a pretext, to cover for the truth. He's not just a former president. He's a defeated former president. Defeated by a margin of over 7 million of your votes in a full and free and fair election. There is simply zero proof the election results are inaccurate. In fact, in every venue where evidence had to be produced, an oath to tell the truth had to be taken, the former president failed to make his case. Let's think about it. The former president and his supporters have never been able to explain how they accept as accurate the other election results that took place on November 3rd. The elections for governor, United States Senate, House of Representatives. Elections which they closed the gap in the House. They challenged none of that. President's name was first. Then we went down the line. Governors, senators, House of Representatives. Somehow those results are accurate on the same ballot. But the presidential race was flawed. And on the same ballot, the same day, cast by the same voters. The only difference, the former president didn't lose those races. He just lost the one that was his own. Finally, the third big lie being told by a former president and his supporters, that the mob who sought to impose their will through violence are the nation's true patriots. Is that what you thought when you looked at the mob ransacking the Capitol, destroying property, literally defecating in the hallways, rifling through the desks of senators and representatives, hunting down members of Congress? Patriots? Not in my view. To me, the true patriots were the more than 150 Americans who peacefully expressed their vote at the ballot box. The election workers who protected the integrity of the vote. And the heroes who defended this Capitol. You can't love your country only when you win. You can't obey the law only when it's convenient. You can't be patriotic when you embrace and enable lies. Those who stormed this Capitol, and those who instigated and incited, and those who called on them to do so, held a dagger at the throat of America, at American democracy. They didn't come here out of patriotism or principle. They came here in rage, not in service of America, but rather in service of one man. Those who incited the mob, the real plotters who were desperate to deny the certification of this election, defy the will of the voters. But their plot was foiled. Congressmen, Democrats, and Republicans stayed. Senators, representatives, staff, they finished their work the Constitution demanded. They honored their oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Look, folks, now it's up to all of us, to we the people, to stand for the rule of law, to preserve the flame of democracy, to keep the promise of America alive. The promise is at risk, targeted by the forces that value brute strength over the sanctity of democracy, fear over hope, personal gain over public good. Make no mistake about it, we're living at an inflection point in history, both at home and abroad. We're engaged anew in a struggle between democracy and autocracy, between the aspirations of the many and the greed of the few, between the people's right of self-determination and the self-seeking autocrat. From China, Russia, and beyond, they're betting that democracy's days are numbered. They've actually told me democracy is too slow, too bogged down by division to succeed in today's rapidly changing, complicated world. And they're betting. They're betting America will become more like them and less like us. They're betting that America is a place for the autocrat, the dictator, the strongman. I do not believe that. That is not who we are. That is not who we have ever been. And that is not who we should ever be. Our founding fathers, as imperfect as they were, set in motion an experiment that changed the world, literally changed the world. Here in America, the people would rule. Power would be transferred peacefully, never at the tip of a spear or the barrel of a gun. They committed paper an idea that they couldn't live up to, but an idea that couldn't be constrained. Yes, in America, all people are created equal. We reject the view that if you succeed, I fail. If you get ahead, I fall behind. If I hold you down, I somehow lift myself up. Former president who lies about this election and the mob that attacked this Capitol could not be further away from the core American values. They want to rule or they will ruin. Ruin what our country fought for at Lexington and Concord, at Gettysburg and Omaha Beach, Seneca Falls, Selma, Alabama. What we were fighting for? The right to vote, the right to govern ourselves, the right to determine our own destiny. With rights come responsibilities. Responsibility to see each other as neighbors. Maybe we disagree with that neighbor, but they're not an adversary. Responsibility to accept defeat. Then get back in the arena and try again the next time to make your case. Responsibility to see that America is an idea. An idea requires vigilant stewardship. As we stand here today, 1 year since January 6, 2021, the lies that drove the anger and madness we saw in this place, they have not abated. So we have to be firm, resolute, and unyielding in our defense of the right to vote and to have that vote counted. Some have already made the ultimate sacrifice in this sacred effort. Jill and I have mourned police officers in this Capitol Rotunda not once but twice in the wake of January 6th. Once to honor Officer Brian Sicknick, who lost his life the day after the attack, and a second time to honor Officer Billy Evans, who lost his life defending this Capitol as well. We think about the others who lost their lives and were injured, and everyone living with the trauma of that day, from those defending this Capitol to members of Congress in both parties and their staffs, to reporters, cafeteria workers, custodial workers, and their families. Don't kid yourself. The pain and scars from that day run deep. I've said it many times, and it's no more true or real than we think about the events of January 6th. We are in a battle for the soul of America. A battle that by the grace of God and the goodness and greatness of this nation, we will win. Believe me, I know how difficult democracy is, and I'm crystal clear about the threats America faces. But I also know that our darkest days can lead to light and hope. From the death and destruction, as the Vice President referenced in Pearl Harbor, came the triumph over the forces of fascism. From the brutality of Bloody Sunday and the Edmund Pettus Bridge came historic voting rights legislation. So now let's step up, write the next chapter in American history, where January 6th marks not the end of democracy, but the beginning of a renaissance of liberty and fair play. I did not seek this fight brought to this Capitol 1 year ago today, but I will not shrink from it either. I will stand in this breach. I will defend this nation. And I will allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of democracy. We will make sure the will of the people is heard, that the ballot prevails, not violence, that authority in this nation will always be peacefully transferred. I believe the power of the presidency and the purpose is to unite this nation, not divide it, to lift us up, not tear us apart. See, about us, not about me. Deep in the heart of America burns a flame lit almost 250 years ago of liberty, freedom, and equality. This is not a land of kings or dictators or autocrats. We're a nation of laws, of order, not chaos, of peace, not violence. Here in America, the people rule through the ballot, and their will prevails. So let us remember, together, we're one nation, under God, indivisible. That today, tomorrow, and forever at our best, we are the United States of America. God bless you all. May God protect our troops. And may God bless those who stand watch over our democracy.
US President Joe Biden there addressing the United States of America on the anniversary of the Capitol Hill insurrection. Well, we're joined now by US political analyst Laurie Laird. Laurie, some very strident imagery there and name-calling. Will that really unite the United States of America?
Do you know, Joe Biden really came out swinging here. You know, he has, to a certain extent, has backed off any kind of criticism of his predecessor. And this has been the case really since a year ago, since January 6th of 2020. And the feeling was that Joe Biden, while he may have been alarmed, concerned, disgusted by these images that you and I are looking at right now, that he didn't want to distract from his incredibly ambitious legislative agenda. We haven't heard Joe Biden talk all that much about the events of January 6th. Today marked a real departure from that. This was a very angry president, a very angry Joe Biden. And while he didn't mention his predecessor, Donald Trump, by name, Donald Trump really was the ghost in the room there, wasn't he? He talked about the former president, a former president who refused to accept a peaceful transfer of power because of his own ego. And we heard much about that. So yes, Joe Biden really came out swinging here. That was a very, very angry president. Now, as to your question, will this do anything to unite the U.S.? Will this do anything to unite Democrats and Republicans? And by the way, 70% of Republicans do believe that the election was stolen, despite that Joe Biden saying. There have been no indications, there have been no courts in the land that have given any kind of legitimacy to that claim. But will this unite Americans? Probably not. Americans are very divided. We've been saying this for a year, but Republicans seem to have become, or both sides really, seem to have become much, much more set in their ways. There's been very little change in the polling about how many people believe that the election is stolen. So this speech will go no way at all toward uniting the U.S., if in fact it's true that the U.S. can be united at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I picked up on was he said that this was an inflection point in history, both at home and abroad, and said that countries like China and Russia are betting that democracy's days are over. And it strikes me, in fact, that America's biggest problem is of their own creation. It's social media. And rather than words, perhaps he should be using action to castrate the big social media giants from using algorithms which essentially create these huge schisms in society.
I mean, that's a very, very interesting question. And how has social media fueled this antipathy between the two sides of the American political divide? Very good question. And I think you made a very, very good point, which is let's get the social media companies to publish their algorithms. Let's try and learn a little bit more about how news is fed to various consumers of internet news. You're right, Congress has not taken all that much of a step to even really understand what social media is doing. There is a tough woman at the head of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, who will be looking at these things. She's called Lena Khan. She has been called previously for a breakup for some of these big companies. So that's something that may unfold. But I have to say, I think social media is exacerbating antipathy that was already there. America has been a very, very divided country. Really, since Barack Obama was elected, there were many Republicans, many in the U.S., including Donald Trump, who questioned the legitimacy of Barack Obama's presidency of his election. So these schisms have been here for a very long time. Absolutely, they are exacerbated by social media, but there does seem to be a complete lack of political discourse in the U.S. with both Republicans and Democrats talking past one another. And some of the statistics that we are seeing, I mentioned these briefly earlier, but as I mentioned, 70% of Republicans think the election was stolen. As many as 40% think that sometimes it's okay to use violence to achieve their ends. These are pretty alarming statistics.
I mean, I'm someone who has experience of working in foreign elections and sometimes very volatile foreign elections, and I would never dream of encouraging a president to use words like mob, forces of fascism, civil war. How do you think the American media are now going to pick this up and represent it on the front pages of tomorrow's papers?
I think the media will be exactly, unfortunately, what we expect. I think much of the left-wing media will praise Joe Biden for this. They will praise Joe Biden for taking such a strong stance against Donald Trump. I think much of the media has been concerned that Joe Biden hasn't spoken out all that much against his predecessor. And I think that there will be media that positions itself to the right that will be very critical of Joe Biden, will question his competency. And this is really something I'm noticing when I speak to American colleagues, American family and friends. Joe Biden's competency is increasingly being questioned. Joe Biden is coming up to, I think, a very tough bit of his presidency, and the media that was not inclined to report on Joe Biden very positively will take this and again question his competency. I think one of the interesting things is the fact that Kamala Harris spoke before Joe Biden today. We have not seen very much of Kamala Harris. I've been wondering about this for months. Where has Kamala Harris been? She could given the advanced years of Joe Biden, she could be president sooner rather than later. We see American people have seen very, very little of her. Will she be, if under certain circumstances she ascends to the presidency, will she be dogged by questions of legitimacy? Very interesting to see her speaking first, to see the two of them side by side, and to see Kamala Harris introducing her boss, the president.
Laurie, it's been fantastic speaking to you today. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your viewpoint from the States. Laurie Laird there, who's an American political commentator. Well, let's bring in our friend of the show today, Iman Aitan, who's an activist and organiser of Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, you've heard that speech, and I know you're no big fan of Trump. Do you think that those words are going to heal the nation? Do you think he's right to stand there and be so firm and strident and say, look, this must never happen in America again, but actually sort of name call those who might have been supporters of President Trump?
I think he's just calling a spade a spade. It gets to a point where you just have to be categorically clear. There is no tolerance in regards to this type of behaviour. And I think, as we've heard, he hasn't necessarily done that over the last year. And I think this was the perfect opportunity to just take a very strong stance. And I think that's what's needed, ultimately. We have to be clear on what is right and what is wrong, just like you said. And I think the main person that needs to say that is the president. So I think his approach was good. I don't necessarily know if it's the best approach, but I do think he is ultimately trying to galvanise, and I think that was his agenda, and I think he did well.
Well, let's also bring in Brendan O'Neill, who writes for Spiked Online, former editor, of course, of Spiked Online. Brendan, what was your take on Biden's speech? Do you think that that's the right approach to deal with the situation that happened a year ago? And do you think that's going to unite the disunited states? Well, we can't seem to get Brendan at the moment, so I'm going to come back to you, Imar. Oh, no, here we are. We've got Brendan. There he is. Brendan, do you think that that is going to unite the disunited states, or do you think there was far too much strident rhetoric in that speech?
I don't think it's going to unite the United States. I think it's a very divided country. I think the events of last year proved that, and a lot of the political discussion over the past year has proven that as well. I think it's important to remember that there were two forms of hysteria after the Capitol riot last year. Firstly, there was the mob itself, which I think behaved incredibly badly. But then there was the response to it from the chattering classes and the media elite, and from the people around Biden too, who talked about it as if it was a coup. It wasn't a coup. It was not an organized attempt to seize power. They talked about it as an expression of white supremacy. There was no evidence that it was an expression of white supremacy. They created all these terms like domestic terrorism and called for new laws to punish people who have certain beliefs and certain viewpoints. So the rash response to the riot in Capitol Hill, I think, could pose longer-term dangers than the riot itself in terms of impacting on freedom and people's right to express themselves.
Yeah, I'm going to bring back in Iman. I mean, Brendan just said that there were two forms of hysteria. Is that something that you think went on, or do you think the blame is very much in one particular camp here?
No, I think both sides are culpable. I think there's definitely been a lot of politics that we're seeing from both sides, and I think it's not helpful ultimately, but this is how it goes in regards to politics, right? You try to undermine your opponent's position, as we know. So I think that's, again, what we're seeing here from both sides.
I mean, I asked Laurie Laird a few minutes ago whether or not that Biden should be seeking action rather than words. I'm going to come back to you, Brendan. Do you think, frankly, it's high time that America dealt with a problem of its own making, which is putting so much power into the hands of unaccountable dot-com bros in Silicon Valley who seem to be doing a hell of a lot to influence public opinion and election results?
Yeah, I'm terrified by the amount of power that big tech has to impact on political debate, political discussion. You know, it's also a year since Trump was thrown off Facebook and Twitter and other social media outlets. He was still at that time the sitting president of the United States who'd been voted into power by more than 60 million people. The fact that unaccountable, unelected billionaire oligarchs are able to exercise that much control over the flow of information, I think is frankly terrifying. And I know that some people on the left support Silicon Valley when it bans extremists or when it bans Donald Trump. I think they're putting themselves onto a hiding to nothing. If you entrust the right to freedom of speech to these unaccountable people, it will come back to haunt you. It will come back to impact on you at some point in the future. We need to argue for the fullest, frankest freedom of speech possible, even for offensive speech, even for people who say things we dislike. And we've got to push the billionaires out of the realm of freedom.
I mean, I want to come back to you now. I mean, I think Trump is likely to stand again. He's sort of suggested that that is his intention, indeed, here on an exclusive interview with GBNews. So if Trump is going to rise like a phoenix from the ashes, how do you think the world, America, organisations such as BLM are going to handle that?
I think it's just going to be a hot mess, if I'm honest with you. I think it's just going to get worse. We're already very much divided in this country. America's very much divided. And I think when he decides to crawl out of whatever cave he is living in at this present moment in time, I think he will make everything a lot worse. So I'm praying that he just stays where he is and we can move on and forget about Trump.
And Brendan, what do you think of the likelihood of the return of Trump and whether or not this is going to increase some of the huge tensions and social schisms that we've witnessed over the past few years in America?
Well, I don't think Trump can resist the temptation to try and get back into power. He likes that kind of thing very clearly. I was never a Trumpite. I was not particularly a fan of Donald Trump or many of the things that he did. But I think it's important to understand why so many people voted for him. They voted for him because the establishment as it previously existed, the kind of technocratic, distant elites, had let them down time and again in relation to the economy, in relation to their choices, their freedoms, their right to live their lives as they see fit. Lots of people thought that they were being ruled by an establishment that didn't understand them and didn't like them very much. And that is why so many people, especially in the Rust Belt, took a punt on someone like Donald Trump because they wanted to shake things up. The problem is that the decaying old establishment has not improved. So the scope for ordinary people to take another punt on Trump or a different kind of populist politician is still there. The problem is the politics as it previously existed, not the populist rebellions that some people engage in.
Brendan, thank you so much for coming on the programme today. Brendan O'Neill, of course, there. Now, finally, Iman, do you think that America can move forwards, just very briefly?
To be honest, I think it would take a miracle. That's just my opinion. I think it would genuinely take a miracle. They are so divided. And then, of course, every attempt to galvanise just seems to kind of backfire. I again, looking at the speech, we can't categorically say that this is actually going to unite the nation. So I think it's going to take a miracle. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of effort. People have to be rational, put their emotions aside, and I think hopefully then we can start to see a bit more progress in regards to everyone being united in America.
Iman, thank you ever so much for joining us. So sorry we didn't get to do our fun bits of the show. I'm afraid Biden rather eclipsed your moment there, but we're going to have you back so we can get your manifesto and your trigger points.
Yes, please.
Thank you for joining me today. You've been watching We Need to Talk About. I'll be back at the same time again tomorrow, of course. Coming up next, it is, of course, The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. That's after a short break and the weather forecast. I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A cold one out there today. A wet day for most as well. Rain for the majority, but there is some snow falling over the hills across northern England and Scotland, courtesy of a deep area of low pressure just to the west of Iceland. These weather fronts bringing the moisture, hitting the cold air. It was a frosty start for most of us this morning. And as that wet weather hits the cold air, we will see a continued risk of snow, certainly for the next few hours over the higher routes through the Pennines, across the southern uplands and into the mountains of Scotland further north. There will be some snow on the higher routes, so say the A9, for example. Not lasting too long, but not very pleasant travelling out there. A wet day for most, but staying largely dry across East Anglia and the southeast until this evening. Feeling pretty cold out there, even though later on temperatures could get up to 8 or 9 across the southwest. The rain reaches East Anglia and the southeast before scooting away through the evening, and then showers come into the northwest. Again, mostly rain at low levels, but some heavy snow is likely over relatively small hills across the northwestern quarter of the UK, and likely to be quite icy as well as temperatures drop close to freezing in towns and cities, a little below in rural areas. But still a potential for heavy snow showers and ice across western Scotland, western parts of Northern Ireland, northwest England in the morning. So just something to be aware of. Some travel disruption certainly possible here. Rain mostly across Wales and southwest England, but some snow mixed in here for a time as well. Again, chiefly over the hills. Some sunny spells on Friday, but temperatures back closer to just 3 or 4 Celsius for most of us and feeling colder with the wind, and certainly when the showers come along. Staying pretty showery during Friday evening, so again, as temperatures drop sharply, we could see some icy conditions for a time. And then out west, we've got another set of weather fronts which will bring most places a wet spell during Saturday with some strong winds. Sunday does look drier and brighter at this stage.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by